Well, let's just jump into it. Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. The buckets are set. We've got some rookies dispersed. This year's rookies dispersed throughout the different buckets. Obviously, you've got. I think in the past we've done it based on like career winnings on how we do it. So like seeing Cody Meyer in bucket A is not surprising. I think Dakota Eber is probably in bucket B or C. Where's Dakota? Where'd you
Uh,
shove Dakota?
Dakota actually might be
You
in.
put him in bucket E. That's a steal. Okay, we'll get into that. But anyways, they should be dispersed throughout. Cody Meyer, I see him in bucket A. Um, we maybe see some other people mixed in as well. So
There's
keep an
two.
eye
There's
on that.
two rookies per bucket until bucket E, and then there's a handful more
Oh,
in
I see
bucket E.
Easton.
But
Yeah,
there's
Easton in
two.
bucket A. Yeah.
Correct. Yep. The top two in tackle warehouse EQ points per bucket, A, B, C, D, and then E obviously has more than two. So that's how we split it up. If you don't like it, tough. Everybody's got the same ability to pick whoever they want. So I don't want to hear about it.
Well, and then it looks like bucket B has Randy Howell and Tucker Smith, which
That
Randy's
includes
not a rookie, but he's new to
Yeah,
the Elite
that
Series
includes
this
all
year.
the
Yes.
new guys. So Cliff
And
Page,
then
obviously.
yeah, Pace is in bucket C with the likes of Paul Marks. Bucket D, we've got um, Andrew Loberg and Emil Wagner, and then bucket E, everyone else. So Beau Browning, Blake Capps, Dakota Ebear, Evan Kung. That's it. So cool. Let's get into it. And then the rest of them are based off of AOY standings from 2024. If you're in the top 18 in points, obviously, if we're doing two new guys per bucket, basically, top 18 in points will get you in bucket A from last season. So I'm gonna go through and pick my buckets real quick. We'll go through all five and then we'll explain through there. So bucket A, I've got Brandon Lester. Um, Obviously, we'll get into explaining that, but bucket B, Pat Schlapper. Bucket C, Luke Palmer. Bucket D, Brandon Card, and bucket E, Jake Whitaker. So um, bucket A. Let's hear your fives then. Sorry, I'm rusty
Yeah.
on this.
So I'm going a little mixture of like high percentage, low percentage, kind of something that I normally do. Bucket A, Chris Johnston. Bucket B, Wes Logan. Bucket C, Greg Hackney. Bucket D, Mark Menendez. And bucket E, Beau Browning. For no reason other than I just want to pick Beau Browning in fantasy fishing. And if he proves me wrong, then he'll never get picked again.
Hey, I picked him in our rookie story, saying that I expect him to be our rookie of the year leader after the St. John's. So I expect him to at least be the highest rookie. We'll see. Um, Brandon Lester, bucket A for me. I picked him before there were really any percentages formed, like I picked him so early that the percentages were moot, but he's at 3%. Man, Brandon's record, I think he's got like 25 tournaments in the state of Florida and 13 top 25s. It's so hard to be consistent in Florida. Even if you narrow it down to the St. John's, I think he's had one bad finish at the St. John's and everything else was great, top 25-esque. So Brandon Lester just rock solid. He returned to form like we expect after a tough 2023. He was back in form 2024 in bucket A where we expect. Florida fits his style. St. John's River is a combination of that, a little bit offshore, able to fish with your electronics if you want, but then also everything else you'd expect, shallow water fishing, cypress trees in places, lily pads otherwise, a stickworm, which is Brandon Lester's best friend a lot of the times, no matter how you rig it. And so I think Brandon Lester just got to get me started, Kyle. I got to get me a good guy out of the gate. Obviously, we know last year's schedule, quite a few with smallmouth lakes, with Smith Lake. There was a lot of forward facing sonar excellence at the top of the AOY race. And so I'm not just trying to pick young guys on an old school fishery like the St. John's. I got to find some mixture. Patrick Walters is going to be an eye that people put a lot of thought into. Chris and Corey Johnston. Everybody else really relatively unproven on the St. John's. So I'm going with the sure thing, which there are no sure things in fishing, but the most sure thing, Brandon Lester and Bucket A.
I like that pick. Obviously, bucket A, if you look at it, there's like five anglers that are making up like 75% of the the picks in that bucket. So it is a good opportunity if you want to take a risk in bucket A. Some really, really big time hammers in there. Jay Shakurit, obviously, like you said, with Brandon Lester, Chris Zaldain, some
Adding
really, really,
Cody and Easton in there.
yeah, really, really incredible anglers in there at, sub 3%. But for me, I'm going Chris Johnston. Just consistent. I mean, consistent at the St. Johns River. You look at Corey's got 21% in bucket A. Typically, when the Johnston brothers are in play and you're going to pick one or the other, I almost always just pick the lower of the two, just playing the odds because I feel like they're so consistent at the same clip. It's very rare that one brother has a lot of success on one body of water and then the other one doesn't. I mean, they've both done extremely well. Corey obviously getting the win last year. I'm going to say this. I think that at the St. Johns River last year, I mean, this is not like a big secret. I think Chris kind of aided Corey in a way. I think he definitely let off a lot of his stuff, which allowed Corey to, have more area, more, fish. I mean, essentially that were on bed and things of that nature. And I think that first tournament of the season, I don't think there's any of that going on. I think it's head to head Corey versus Chris, and whoever wins wins. And I'm not saying that those two are going to win the tournament, but I think those two, have been so good at the St. Johns River. It's hard to root against them based on their success. And 11.7%, I'll take it for Chris Johnston in bucket A. And I'll go ahead and move us on to bucket B. So again, I kind of always go with this theme of like I'll take a couple high percentage and take a couple low percentage. Very surprising to me. I understand John Cox, Drew Benton are in bucket B. I hope like crazy those guys are reeling in 8 to 10 pounders off bed. And, Drew Benton has, another one of those amazing canal catches like he did back in, I want to say that was 19, maybe the first day of the event. I hope we see a
He
lot
even
of
had a
that.
big one last year on day 4. He had like a six and a
Yeah,
half
a-
pounder in the
absolutely.
canal.
Don't get me wrong. I hope we see a ton of that. I hope that is just like Bass Live is full of just giant catches. However, I will say Wes Logan is incredibly consistent at the St. John's. Not like he's always reeling in top tens, but for me, I'll look at the math here. I obviously did the research on it. Wes Logan has
He's like point 0.7 or something.
never finished worse than 32nd. So he's in what, 4 Elite Series trips. He's finished somewhere in the basically in the top 30 every single time. I mean, for me anymore, just to get the season started, I just want a little bit of consistency. I don't want any tanks. Let's just have some guys make the 50 cut and let's see what happens. So I'm going Wes Logan and bucket B.
Hey, he popped up on camera last year as well, and I think he had the conversation with John Cruz about like I don't think he said this place is title, or but it was like I'm not even thinking about the tide, and so
Yeah,
maybe he considers it a little bit and has gotten even better than he was in this body of water.
I've actually talked to him about that exact thing because I do remember John Cruz on our podcast was telling us about that story
How
of
even if it's slight, it matters at
yeah.
times.
And,
Yeah,
and he had brought up the story of how Wes was like, when they talked in the water, he's like, yeah, I'm not even paying attention to it. And he's still catching them there. So, I mean, the more times you go to a body of water, especially one that you've already had success, you start putting those pieces of the puzzle together and definitely become deadly. So Wes Logan at 0.7%, not even a percent. I mean, like I'll take my odds there, boys. I'll take them.
it is a loaded bucket, and I it's so hard to pick Drew Benton or Drew Cook or John Cox. Even Stetson Blaylock has had great finishes here. Matt Arias had great finishes here. And so when you think about those five guys, you're just like, which one do you choose? And then you end up hating yourself because you picked the wrong one out of the five. You pick the guy who doesn't get it dialed in. So I kind of just avoided those guys in general because I'm not quite sure which ones it's going to lend to. John Cox has done well there every year, but John Cox has fished a different place on the St. Johns River every time. And I have no idea if he's going to do something crazy, if he's going to go back to somewhere and make a long run, less fishing time. Like, I'm not sure. I don't know what the water level does to certain areas. They would know if it's going to expose some areas. And so they end up becoming the favorites because Cliff Prince isn't in our field this year. So they end up becoming the most seasoned favorites. So hard for me to pick them. I just kind of got to I'm just gonna watch that. I'm just gonna watch that knife fight go on over there, and I'm not gonna. My fighter's not in that knife fight. I've got Pat Schlapper. I feel like he did well at Seminole. I feel like he's done well randomly at some events like this. With this being a different kind of event for Midwesterners, not all of them do great, but this is a place you can do well. Bob Downey's done well here. Seth Feider's done well here. There's different times that these guys have done well. And so I feel like this time, Pat Schlapper, especially if some of the fish pull off because it is a little bit colder in at the start of the tournament. Um, that's the one thing we got to keep an eye on for me. Hasn't had a great track record here in his couple finishes. He's been in the 50s to the 80th, but I expect this to be one that he makes the cut in. I just had a feeling when I was scanning down the list, unless you went with the shoe-in favorites, you kind of just this is a wide open bucket other than a couple people, and so I'm going Pat Schlapper. No real rhyme or reason except for there's always a Midwesterner who ends up doing well, and I think that it could be him this time around. Let's get to bucket C. I've got a guy that's very similar type fisherman as your pick. You picked Greg Hackney. I picked Luke Palmer. Luke Palmer won at the Santee Cooper Lakes, fishing similar styles. Loves this type of fishing. I could see him really doing well here to kick off the year, whether it was sight fishing or just fishing the cover, the structure available to him. He's been here enough now that he should not be worried about travel distances and like he knows what to do at the St. Johns River. So I would lean with Luke Palmer at the moment for bucket C for me. I'm not really picking based on percentages like you said and like I said. I picked my team so early, percentages weren't even really formed. I think when I clicked someone, I made them go up 0.1% because I was still so early in the process. But he's under 2%, and this is right up his alley. I mean, these first two events are right up his alley. And I wouldn't put it past him to have a great event here. So Luke Palmer, bucket C for me.
Yeah, I mean, Greg Hackney, do I really need to explain that one? I feel like that's
Nope.
a pretty self-explanatory pick.
He was one
Uh,
of my picks in the live well. I picked Lester and Hackney as ones to watch, which if you haven't seen the live well, you'll see this podcast. Just know I shot the live well before this podcast at the Screen and Knowledge with Tommy, and I mentioned one of my picks, and then Greg Hackney's going to get picked by everybody. So
I think Greg Hackney is going to punish the first fish that bites on day one. Like I'm talking like punish. And I think that he's going to do a lot of that throughout this tournament. I think he's going to do a lot of that throughout the first 2 weeks in Florida. And frankly, I think he's going to do a lot of that throughout the season. I know you and I talked about him the last podcast we did. I mean, if I'm going to talk the talk, I'm going to walk the walk. If I think Greg Hackney's going to have a big season, then I'm going with him right out of the gates in bucket C. Now, sticking with the trend of a little old school, right? A little bit of consistency. I'm going Mark Menendez in bucket D. And you know what? I've covered Mark Menendez on the water at the St. Johns River. He fishes the exact same stretch basically every single time we go there, and he seems to catch them every single time. There's just something about the St. Johns River, especially when you exclude Rodman, right? I mean, Rodman had opened up something that, over the last couple times we've been down there that maybe we didn't see a lot before in that, the offshore standing timber deal, a lot of forward facing sonar, you
groups of
know,
fish.
but the rest of the body of water is very old school. I mean, you look at Rick Clunn's wins there. I mean, just rolling a spinnerbait by cover. I mean, and catching giants. Mark Menendez had a ton of success there flipping, throwing a spinnerbait. It allows you to do a lot of old school techniques. I think that's a main reason Mark Menendez has had success there. He's had a couple duds, mixed in, but overall, it suits him super well. And then bucket D, I want to say the percentage was pretty low when I picked him, 9.4, so not super, super low, but I will certainly take it. And I think Mark Menendez is going to have a big event here at the St. Johns River. Ronnie, who do you got?
You could call Mark Menendez the Crescent Lake Kid or the Crescent Lake Catcher. He's not really a kid anymore, but the Crescent Lake Catcher because he always seems to find a way to do that. Um,
Every
in,
time.
in bucket D, I've got the first ever angler from the college series to make the elites, Brandon Card. He's got finishes like 34th, 37th. 26th. He's got a couple 100s in there, but those were early in his career, um, pre the river changing. You know what I'm saying? Pre the river changing, where there's a lot less eelgrass. We've gone here a lot more when it's been colder. Remember, pre 2016, the elite season didn't start till March. So we had never been to the St. Johns River really in February. Then we start coming in 2016, 2019. Those are when the February events started coming into play. And then we obviously had April last year. So Brandon Card, uh, overall rock solid. Finishes in the 19th, I think 19th a couple finishes ago, 28th, 37th, finishes like that. This is a good in between lake. I don't think Brandon has to deal with health problems anymore. That's been kind of lingering the last 2 years for him. He is all good, but I expect a bounce back season from him. Not bucket D worthy. There's a lot of guys in bucket D we expect to see higher. Just look at the top alphabetically. Card, Cherry, Christie, Cobb. Those are four guys I expect to be higher than they were last year in the points race. And then obviously Matt Robertson down in there, Bryant Smith down in there. You could pick a Brad Watley. I'm shocked to see Brad Watley at 3% after him getting second last year, him getting two top tens in the state of Florida last year. I think that he could be one that's like a not a diamond in the rough, but like the snake that you're looking at and you're wondering if it's going to bite you, and then it bites you, and you're like, well, I should have known that. Well, Brad Watley's sitting right there at 3% with some good, tangible St. Johns River finishes. So I'm going Brandon Card, but there's a couple other guys you could definitely think about putting on your team when it comes to bucket D.
No question about it. Ronnie, who you got in bucket E?
Bucket E, I've got Jake Whitaker. Man, I mean, if I've said warming areas like canals will do well, who's the canal king at St. John's? I mean, it's been Whitaker. Whitaker's caught him in the canals above George. I think he's fished some canals below George. I think he's fished all over the place. But there's a couple key areas that he's always really found a way to outfish the competition around him and do well. I think he caught 8.5 pounder last year, or an 8 pounder last year on day one, and I think he was on camera going into day three, but didn't have the best day three, and so he finished, mid of the top 50 cut, like somewhere in the 25 to 35 range or something like that after a tough day three, but did well enough to be on camera, and that's something we say every single time with Whitaker is he always does well enough. 1% bucket E. He's going to be the bottom of the bottom. He is the last name in the last bucket alphabetically, so people are not going to scroll that far down. This is his style of fishing. This really is a place that he's done well, feels real comfortable doing it, and I'm not putting it past him to have another great finish here to start off his season strong. And we'll
So
be going to Okeechobee next, where the last time we were there, he had a top 10 for the elites. So this could be a great start to the season for Whitaker.
safe to say he's going to put that wacky worm around some
Oh,
big.
absolutely.
All right, I like it.
Absolutely.
I like it. So bucket E, I'm going with Beau Browning, as I already mentioned.
You got the
I
top of the bucket. You got the top guy in the bucket, and I got the bottom guy alphabetically.
I was the lazy one, didn't want to scroll all the way
You
down,
didn't
and I
scroll.
went straight from the top. Bo is an incredibly good vibrating jig fisherman. Like has always been really good with the chatterbait, very similar to his dad. I'm gonna guess that he puts a lot of eggs in that basket, is able to just get bites doing that, whether it's offshore, like hard spots, that kind of deal, fishing up shallow. And then also he's much like his dad in the sense that like you look at Steven's career and he was always able to do well, especially any tournament where maximizing water is key, right? You have an area and you make it last for what everything it's worth, right? That's just been an Arkansas staple thing. Kevin Shorts, all the guys, Scott Rooks, the guys from Arkansas that grew up fishing the Arkansas River, shallow water, like that's just a specialty of theirs. And I think that Bo's no different in that sense. Obviously, he's more than capable with his electronics. I think he's incredibly good at that. But at heart, he loves fishing shallow. You've fished with him, you know that. I mean, he can really fish shallow with the best of them. I think he's going to get off to a really good start, kind of like you already predicted. St. John's River, not a place he's got necessarily a ton of experience, but then, going straight to Okeechobee where he had a top 10 in open last year.
Yeah.
Uh, so I mean, I think that he's gonna have a good start to the finish, and I'll take my buddy Beau and Bucket E.
And
But
I think it helps that he's
Bucket E
got a good
for buddies, right? I mean, that's pretty much like the way we picked. Buddies are for Bucket E.
you're going to be really screwed when Atkins, Logan, and Beau Browning are all in bucket E or bucket C. You're going to have a hard time. But um, yeah, and it helps that he's not all on his own as a rookie. He's got Easton Fothergill, his schoolmate from Montevallo, worked together on the opens last year, probably rooming together, working together once again to just break down these bodies of water that they maybe have never been to. So I'm confident they'll know something, whether it's the winning thing or it's something to survive on. They'll know something.